A young couple moved into a new neighborhood, and the next morning while they were eating breakfast, the young woman saw her neighbor hanging out the laundry. Wow, she said, that laundry is not very clean. She doesn't know how to wash correctly. Maybe she should get some new laundry soap. Well, her husband looked on but said nothing. And every time this happened, every time the neighbor hung the washing out to dry, the wife would make some comment like this. Who taught her how to wash clothes? This went on for about a month, and then one morning, the woman was surprised to see a nice clean wash on the line and said to her husband, "Finally, look, she's learned to wash the laundry correctly. Gosh, I wonder who taught her this." And the husband replied, "I got up early this morning and cleaned our windows." Let's admit it, our judgment of others is often clouded by our own failure to see our own shortcomings. Our perception of others is often distorted. Probably most of us are familiar with Jesus' hyperbole. Why do you look at the sawdust in your neighbor's eye when you got a 2x4 sticking out of your own? Buddha said, "Do not look at the faults of others or what they have done or not done. Observe what you yourself have done or not done." Because both masters would agree that the faults of others are easier to see. Both Jesus and Buddha invite us to look within before we look without. And let's confess right now. I know we're not big at confessing here at CCSM, but let's confess. We could all be less judgmental. Oh, good, we're off to a good start. All right. Judge not lest you be judged. I used to view that as an indictment, a harsh reprimand for my propensity for prejudice, which really means what? Prejudgment. An indictment against the kind of arrogance that sometimes we're prone to. But rather than look at it as an indictment, how about we look at it that both Buddha and Jesus are inviting us on a path of spiritual wholeness. They're offering us a prescription for well-being. Now, let's keep this real today. There are times when we need to make judgments, right? In fact, our minds are such that we, without even knowing that we do it, we categorize everything. It's how our minds work. It's not good or bad, it's just how our minds work. We need to make judgments about things. So, just from the news in the last couple of days, I'm going to ask you some questions. Do not answer out loud. Usually I want feedback, I don't want feedback. I want you to just think for a moment. Okay, so, should Governor Northam resign after his racist photo in the yearbook when he was in medical school? It's Super Bowl Sunday. Should Colin Kaepernick be sidelined because he took a knee? Or is that really the reason he was sidelined? If an agreement or a compromise cannot be reached regarding the wall, should the president declare a national emergency? Should we be nervous after the intelligence report that came out this week? Do you feel like, in general, in the atmosphere, there's a propensity towards criminalizing the immigrant? Let me ask you. See why I don't want you to answer out loud? Let me ask you. Did you have an opinion about each one of those things? Okay. The very nature of opinion means that we've made a judgment, right? And surely we're not to think about these things and just throw up our hands and say, who am I to judge? Because we need to take a moral stand sometimes. And these issues take judging. But I want to suggest that while we need to make judgments, while we need to form opinions, that those very judgments and opinions that we have, as different as they might be in this room, have been formed by our cultural and social and religious conditioning. It's often where you stand and your experience in life that informs the opinions and judgments you have. We all know that poor judgment, or lack of judgment, as we say, can lead to poor choices and choices that have unwelcome consequences. So when Jesus was talking about judgment, I'm not so sure that he was talking about the things we've just talked about. After all, if you read the Gospels, he had an opinion about a lot of things that were happening, and he wasn't afraid to voice it. Now, Buddha, I'm not at all sure what he meant, because in some forms of Buddhism, you are not supposed to denounce anyone, no matter how vile their behavior might be. That's why I'm a Christian and not a Buddhist. So given all that clearly there are times and places where judgment is actually really important, we can also agree that we could be far less judgmental toward each other. I think in today's age, perhaps more than ever, we need this gentle corrective, this spiritual reminder. Why? Well, people are leaving churches in droves because of the moralistic, exclusive judgmentalism that happens. We see it all the time. I could give you example after example just in this last couple weeks of just terrible judgments that hurt lives. Now, as soon as I say that, let's also add that it's very easy to see how conservative churches are judgmental. In fact, many of you in this room are here today as part of this community because you've left prior communities that are too judgmental. But let's be real. That as those of us who identify as progressive and liberals in the room, we have our own narrow-mindedness and self-righteousness. Somebody say that's right. And so this gentle reminder today, for me and for you, is that in this polarized climate in our nation, we are judging one another far too much of the time. And you can only have polarization if there's harsh judgment. So how is it that we work for inclusion? We work for what we think is right without mimicking the behaviors that we're protesting. How is it that we judge morality without being guilty of the judgmentalism that we oppose and find so disturbing? It's a balancing act, isn't it? This text that you heard today, let the one who was without sin cast the first stone, that text, that story about Jesus, I want you to picture it for a moment. We're talking about stoning, a practice that still goes on in some countries today. Barbaric practice that still goes on. They drag this woman caught in adultery to Jesus. They want to stone her. And they're trying to trap Jesus. What are you going to say about this? Now, what do you say? The text goes on. They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. And Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw the stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. And when they heard it, they went away, one by one. Can you picture it? Well, if you're going to put it that way, okay. And maybe if you were still with your stone, your friend says, remember that story that I said I wouldn't tell anyone? You better put the stone down. They leave, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him, and Jesus straightened up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way. Sin no more." You see, Jesus doesn't draw, stay with me, Jesus doesn't draw attention to her, but he draws attention to the inadequacy and the hypocrisy of the system, religious and political. He does not accuse her, he does not shame her. But in their haste to trap Jesus, they revealed their own moral hypocrisy. And he bends down and writes in the sand, very zen of him, right? Now, some have suggested that what Jesus was writing in the sand were the sins of others who held the stones. But to me, I think that that is probably not the point, nor what he did. I think he wrote something like, "How can I manifest my belovedness and hers? When have I failed?" Perhaps he was thinking about his own shortcomings, because there are a few of them captured in the Gospels. See, when we can face the reality of our own shortcomings and still embrace ourselves with love, we are able to love others. Did you get that? When we're able to embrace our shortcomings with love, we are able to embrace others with love. Both Jesus and Buddha are saying, look within first, always. Turn that into this first. Judge not, lest you be judged. Because at the end of the day, I think what Jesus was calling out was hypocrisy. And when I look at the Gospels, the thing that made him angriest was hypocrisy. So we're called not to be hypocrites. We're called to be pure in heart. We're called to remember the suffering of people. The Buddhists say, be kind to everyone you meet because everyone is fighting a great battle. This is where we're invited to drop our pretense, our self-righteousness. I love to think I'm right, don't you? I must always consider that I might be wrong. Except about today. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you. It is only kindness that makes sense anymore. We are all looking for kindness rather than judgment. So judge not, lest you be judged. Together, let's embrace our own imperfections and shortcomings with love. Then we'll be able to embrace others in that same way, and then perhaps we will know the tender gravity of kindness. Amen.